March 30, 1945. A dark country road near the German city of Paderborn. The blackness was absolute, a suffocating blanket pierced only by the distant, hellish glow of burning vehicles. Down that ink-soaked road, a lone American jeep picked its way forward, its progress cautious, deliberate. Inside sat a man who carried the weight of an entire division on his shoulders, a man whose very presence in that jeep, at that moment, defied the conventional wisdom of modern warfare. He was Major General Maurice Rose, commander of the U.S. Army's 3rd Armored Division, a man hailed by his peers and feared by his enemies as arguably the finest armored commander in the European theater. He was not 10 miles back, sipping coffee in a secure headquarters tent. He was at the sharpest tip of the spear, leading from a position of naked vulnerability because that was where he believed a true commander belonged. He was a soldier's general, a son of a rabbi, and the highest-ranking Jewish officer in the United States Army, driving straight into the crumbling, yet still lethal, heart of the Third Reich. Without warning, the jeep lurched to a halt. Blocking the road, a monstrous silhouette materialized from the gloom. It was a German Tiger tank, a 60-ton behemoth of hardened steel, its long, overhanging 88mm gun barrel now leveled directly at the frail hood of the jeep. In that frozen instant, the calculus of war narrowed to this single, intimate confrontation. General Rose understood the situation with cold clarity. Trapped, outgunned, the rules of warfare were clear and offered a path to survival. A captured general was a prize, to be treated with a certain martial respect. Calmly, he moved to surrender. He stood up in the open vehicle, his hands moving to unbuckle his pistol belt, his intention to disarm unmistakable. He looked up at the German tank commander, a figure now visible in the hatch. March 30, 1945. A dark country road near the German city of Paderborn. The blackness was absolute, a suffocating blanket pierced only by the distant, hellish glow of burning vehicles. Down that ink-soaked road, a lone American jeep picked its way forward, its progress cautious, deliberate. Inside sat a man who carried the weight of an entire division on his shoulders, a man whose very presence in that jeep, at that moment, defied the conventional wisdom of modern warfare. He was Major General Maurice Rose, commander of the U.S. Army's 3rd Armored Division, a man hailed by his peers and feared by his enemies as arguably the finest armored commander in the European theater. He was not 10 miles back, sipping coffee in a secure headquarters tent. He was at the sharpest tip of the spear, leading from a position of naked vulnerability because that was where he believed a true commander belonged. He was a soldier's general, a son of a rabbi, and the highest-ranking Jewish officer in the United States Army, driving straight into the crumbling, yet still lethal, heart of the Third Reich. Without warning, the jeep lurched to a halt. Blocking the road, a monstrous silhouette materialized from the gloom. It was a German Tiger tank, a 60-ton behemoth of hardened steel, its long, overhanging 88mm gun barrel now leveled directly at the frail hood of the jeep. In that frozen instant, the calculus of war narrowed to this single, intimate confrontation. General Rose understood the situation with cold clarity. Trapped, outgunned, the rules of warfare were clear and offered a path to survival. A captured general was a prize, to be treated with a certain martial respect. Calmly, he moved to surrender. He stood up in the open vehicle, his hands moving to unbuckle his pistol belt, his intention to disarm unmistakable. He looked up at the German tank commander, a figure now visible in the hatch. But the rules were about to be shredded. Whether consumed by panic, fanaticism, or pure malice, the German did not see a surrendering officer. He saw a target. He raised his MP-40 submachine gun. The staccato crack of the weapon shattered the night. General Rose was thrown backward, bullets tearing through his head and chest. He was dead before his body collapsed into the jeep. The Tiger's engine roared, it lurched forward, grinding the jeep, and the general's remains, into the cold mud beneath its cleated tracks, before vanishing back into the darkness from which it came. When the news reached the men of the 3rd Armored Division, a profound and seismic shift occurred. The grief was immediate, a physical wound to the unit's spirit. But grief, in the crucible of frontline combat, has a short half-life. It transmuted, molecule by molecule, into something else, a cold, focused, and utterly merciless rage. Their old man, the brain of the Spearhead, had not just been killed. He had been murdered in the act of surrender, his body desecrated. They did not weep. They loaded their guns, serviced their tanks, and looked toward the city on the horizon, Paderborn, the place where his killers had fled, the heart of Nazi armor training. And in one collective, unspoken verdict, they decided to erase it from the map. This is the true story of General Maurice Rose. It is the story of a Jewish warrior who led the charge against the regime that sought to exterminate his people, and it is the story of the fiery, brutal retribution his men exacted in his name. To understand the ferocity of that vengeance, one must first understand the singular man they lost, and why his death was not merely a casualty of war, but a spark that ignited an inferno, the son of a rabbi, the making of a warrior general. Maurice Rose was an anomaly in the upper echelons of the U.S. Army. He did not orbit the political spheres like Eisenhower, nor cultivate a persona of flamboyant brilliance like Patton. His currency was speed, his doctrine relentless, aggressive pressure. He commanded the 3rd Armored Division, the Spearhead, an outfit that lived up to its name. They were the first American unit to fire shells into Germany, the first to breach the vaunted Siegfried Line. Under Rose, the division moved with such blistering, unpredictable velocity that German intelligence reports often placed them in 2 locations at once, so baffling was their pace. But beneath the steel helmet and the stern gaze lay a profound and dangerous secret in the context of 1945. Maurice Rose was Jewish. His father was Rabbi Samuel Rose of Denver, Colorado. In a war against the genocidal ideology of Nazism, to be a Jewish general leading troops into the fatherland was to carry a unique and harrowing risk. Capture by the SS would not mean a stint in a prisoner of war camp, it would mean torture, humiliation, and almost certain execution. Rose seldom spoke of it. He let the thunder of his tanks do the talking. He believed leadership was a physical act, not a theoretical one. While other generals coordinated from chateaus, Rose led from a jeep at the front of the column, exposed to the same artillery, the same ambushes, the same random violence as any rifleman. His men adored him for it. He shared their rations, slept in the same muddy fields, and endured the same bone-deep fatigue. He was not a remote figure on a map, he was the tall, stern presence who would suddenly materialize at a roadside during a lull, asking pointed questions, offering terse corrections, his very presence a testament to shared sacrifice. By March 1945, Rose was at the peak of his operational prowess, driving hard to close the Ruhr pocket, aiming to trap and destroy the last major German army group in the West. His orders were a constant refrain: keep moving. The Germans are off balance. If we stop, they recover. He was a man in a hurry to end a war. The Germans, however, were not finished. They had prepared a deadly reception committee in the forested hills around the town of Paderborn. This was no ordinary municipality. Paderborn was the home of the SS Panzer Training School, a spiritual and logistical hub for the Nazi armored forces. Its defense would be entrusted not to broken conscripts, but to fanatical instructors, officer cadets, and replacement battalions of the Waffen-SS, young men steeped in Nazi ideology, desperate for a chance to prove themselves in the war's dying days. The ambush, chaos in the darkness. March 30th found the 3rd Armored Division strung out along a narrow, winding country road, racing to link up with other Allied units. Flawed intelligence assured them the route was clear. It was a catastrophic error. Hidden in the dense woods lining the road were elements of the SS replacement battalions, equipped with the dreaded Tiger and Panther tanks. As the American column snaked forward, the Germans struck with precision, cutting the division in half. General Rose, true to form, was with the lead combat command. When a frantic radio message crackled through informing him his rear elements were under fierce attack, he did not hesitate. Most generals would have withdrawn to a command post to manage the crisis. Rose did the opposite. He ordered his driver to turn the jeep around. He drove directly toward the intensifying sounds of battle, determined to personally assess the chaos and restore order. What he drove into was a scene from a nightmare. Dusk had given way to full night. In the pitch black, confusion reigned supreme. American Sherman tanks and German Panthers, their silhouettes deceptively similar in the dark, passed each other on the narrow lanes, sometimes without recognition. Isolated firefights erupted and died in the shadows. Rose, realizing his small party was now isolated behind German lines, made a fateful decision. He instructed his driver, technician 5th grade Glenn Shantz, to leave the compromised road and cut across country, aiming to reconnect with the American main body. After a harrowing cross-country trek, they found another road. Relief was short-lived. As they rounded a bend, the road was blocked by the hulking, unmistakable outline of a Tiger tank, its massive gun a mere few dozen yards away. It was a perfect ambush. Rose's tiny convoy, 2 jeeps and a motorcycle, was utterly helpless before the armored giant. The murder, a breach of all codes. What happened next has been scrutinized by historians for decades, but the core facts, corroborated by the surviving eyewitnesses, Shantz and Rose's aide, Major Robert Bellinger, are chilling. The German tank commander, a young SS soldier, shouted from his hatch. The exact words are lost, but the intent was likely in order to surrender. General Rose, a pragmatist to his last breath, knew resistance was suicide. He had no anti-tank weapons. A pistol against a tiger was a gesture of futility. He turned to his men and said, "We have to surrender." He then stood tall in the open jeep. Even in this moment of capitulation, he cut an imposing figure. In a deliberate, clear motion intended to demonstrate he was no threat, he began to unbuckle his pistol belt, reaching to drop it to the ground. It was this motion that sealed his fate. The German tank commander, whether panicked by the proximity of Americans, paranoid that the reaching hand was going for a weapon, or simply driven by ideological hatred, made a decision that violated every convention of land warfare. He did not accept the surrender. He raised his MP-40 and fired a burst directly at General Rose. The general fell, killed instantly. As Shantz and Bellinger dove into a roadside ditch, the Tiger tank advanced, its tracks crushing the jeep and mangling the general's body beneath them, a final, grotesque act of defilement. The tank then withdrew, leaving behind a scene of profound desecration. The 2 survivors lay in the ditch for hours, listening to German voices and vehicles, mere feet from their commander's corpse. At first light, they escaped, stumbling back to American lines to deliver the unbearable news. For Rosie, the forging of a white-hot rage. The report spread through the 3rd Armored Division like a shockwave. The old man is dead. Then, the damning details, they shot him while he was surrendering. Then, the ultimate insult, they ran over him. In combat units, death is a constant companion, accepted with a grim, professional stoicism. But this was different. This was not a death by random shell or a sniper's bullet in a fair fight. This was a calculated execution, a war crime that stripped away the thin veneer of chivalry that sometimes, even in total war, remains. A visceral, collective anger took hold. This was more than a loss, it was a personal affront to every man in the division. General Rose was their father, their protector, their unbeatable talisman. The rumor, persistent, though historically unconfirmed, that the Germans had identified him as Jewish and killed him for it, poured gasoline on the emotional fire. Whether true or not, the soldiers believed it. They believed their Jewish general had been murdered by Nazi fanatics for who he was, not just for what he was. The new division commander, Brigadier General Doyle O. Hickey, inherited not a demoralized unit, but a vengeful legion. He did not need to give a fiery speech to motivate his men. The motivation was already there, burning in their eyes. They painted, for Rosie, on artillery shells. They loaded extra ammunition. The objective was no longer merely to capture Paderborn. The objective was to annihilate it. The city had transformed into a symbol, the lair of the killers, the heart of the SS armor training apparatus. It had to be destroyed. The siege and the firestorm, the revenge on Paderborn. Paderborn in April 1945 was a city of contrasts, a historic medieval core with a grand cathedral, now turned into a fortress by its SS defenders. Fanatical cadets, Hitler Youth, and veteran NCOs barricaded streets, planted explosives, and positioned snipers in the cathedral's twin spires. They were prepared to fight for every stone, to make the Americans pay in blood. On April 1st, the 3rd Armored Division arrived. They did not deploy with cautious tactical deliberation. This was not a methodical clearing operation. This was an assault driven by fury. They surrounded the city and unleashed a biblical-scale bombardment. Dozens of 155 mm long Tom artillery pieces, alongside the guns of hundreds of Sherman tanks and tank destroyers, began a deafening, continuous barrage. The order was unambiguous: take the city, and do not worry about collateral damage. The shells rained down, but the most terrifying weapons were the white phosphorus rounds, Willie Pete. Phosphorus burns at 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit, clinging to surfaces and water only intensifies its fury. On the ancient, timber-framed houses of medieval Paderborn, it was apocalyptic. Fires sprang up, merged, and grew into a self-sustaining firestorm. The inferno created its own wind, sucking oxygen out of basements and streets, suffocating those not consumed by the flames, while the artillery pulverized from a distance, the tanks and infantry moved in. Standard urban warfare doctrine, which emphasizes careful movement and building clearance, was largely discarded. Driven by rage, American tank crews plowed their Sherman straight through houses to clear barricades or create new paths. Any window or doorway from which a shot was suspected to originate received a 75 mm high explosive shell in reply, followed by squads with flamethrowers to purge the rubble. The fighting was savage and intimate. As one veteran later recalled, the prevailing sentiment was simple: we didn't care. We just didn't care. They killed Rose, so we killed their city. No quarter, the unspoken code. In the smoke-choked ruins, the distinction between soldier and fanatic blurred for the men of the Spearhead. While the U.S. Army maintained a generally strong record of taking prisoners, the aftermath of Paderborn is shadowed by the whispers of history. Veterans have alluded, never officially, to a hardening of hearts on those specific days. The sight of the black SS uniform, the very emblem of the ideology that had murdered their general, often proved fatal. These were not sanctioned executions, but moments of immediate, personal justice meted out by enraged soldiers in the heat of a vicious battle. The score was being settled at the individual level, rifle by rifle. By nightfall on April 1st, the battle was effectively over. Paderborn was a smoldering ruin. Approximately 85% of the city center was destroyed. The cathedral, though struck, remained standing, a hollowed-out shell amidst a sea of ashes. The SS garrison had been virtually annihilated. The Americans stood victorious in a landscape of their own creation, their uniforms stained with soot and grief. They had not brought General Rose back, but they had visited upon his killers and their stronghold a retribution of terrifying completeness, aftermath, a hero lost, a mystery unsolved. In the battle's grim aftermath, a detail party returned to the country road to recover the general's body. They found a scene that deepened the wound. His body had been looted. His pistol, his watch, his West Point ring, his helmet, all were gone. This petty theft added a layer of ignominy to the murder, convincing his men that his killers were not soldiers but criminals. He was buried initially in a temporary U.S. military cemetery in Margraten, Netherlands, surrounded by the men he led. The U.S. Army launched a formal investigation to find the Tiger tank commander, aiming to prosecute him for war crimes. Interrogations pointed toward the Schwer SS Panzerabteilung 507, 507th SS Heavy Tank Battalion, but in the chaotic dissolution of the German army and the utter destruction of the Paderborn garrison, the specific individual was never identified. It is likely he perished in the very firestorm his act had helped ignite. Legacy: the forgotten general and the fury of the American soldier. General Maurice Rose faded from popular memory, overshadowed by more famous commanders. Yet, his distinction is stark: he was the only American division commander killed by enemy fire in the European theater. He was a warrior leader in the most authentic sense, a man whose philosophy of frontline command ultimately claimed his life. When news of his death reached America, it was front-page news, a national tragedy. Synagogues across the country held memorial services. But the most enduring monument was not made of stone, it was the scar on the landscape of Paderborn, a city rebuilt but forever marked by the events of April 1945. The story of Maurice Rose and the fate of Paderborn holds uncomfortable truths. It reminds us that the orderly concepts of rules of war are fragile, easily shattered by fear, hatred, or ideology. It demonstrates that the American soldier of World War II, so often remembered as a cheerful liberator, was also a profoundly human instrument of war, capable of immense compassion but also of righteous, terrible fury when betrayed by the enemy's savagery. The murder of their general unleashed a primal need for justice, a justice they delivered not in a courtroom, but with high explosives, white phosphorus, and a determination to leave nothing but ashes in their wake. They sent an unambiguous message to a defeated enemy: the murder of our leaders would be met not with procedural inquiry, but with overwhelming, devastating force. General Rose's story is ultimately one of paradox, a Jewish soldier rising to the pinnacle of a nation's military to destroy history's most virulently anti-Semitic regime, a commander killed while trying to surrender according to the rules, whose death triggered a vengeance that explicitly ignored them. It is a stark chapter in the narrative of the good war, reminding us that even in a cause of ultimate righteousness, the path is walked by fallible, passionate humans, and its costs are written in blood, fire, and an enduring, complicated legacy.